Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Fundamentals of Supply Chain Management webinar. I am Jessica Mugg, and we will begin here very shortly. All righty, welcome and thank you for joining us today. We'll get started in just a second with the program, but I wanted to take a minute and let you know a little bit about how the Oklahoma Manufacturing Alliance is growing stronger in 2021. The Oklahoma Manufacturing Alliance is evolving to a better, more efficient approach in support of state industry and individual manufacturers. Our new plan still involves the familiar manufacturing extension agents, MEAs, around the state, but they are now complemented by regional business consultants, RBCs, and manufacturing specialists with detailed experience. One of the ways we want to share that detailed experience is through these webinars. This is just a brief overview of what can be a much more detailed assistance offered by the Manufacturing Alliance. Of course, we still rely heavily on our network of sponsors and partners. Many of those partners have capability and services that complement our goal of making your business more successful. We certainly cannot do it alone. We have many of our sponsors and educational partners on this call today. Thank you to all of those who are joining us. Also, our team of trusted advisors is now prepared to evaluate companies holistically by assessing, diagnosing, and optimizing operations. If you'd like more information about the assessment process, which is currently subsidized by grants, so there's no charge to the company, give us a call or drop us an email. And remember, MEAs are still accessible, and traditional services like problem solving, business connections, and engineering work remain available for manufacturers in all 77 counties. We are still here when you need us. And now on to our webinar. Today's event will be Fundamentals of Supply Chain Management. We will be continuing this series throughout February and into March. These webinars will be delivered today by supply chain expert Jim Fleming. Rajesh will be on the call today as well. Dr. Rajesh Krishnamurthy is an engineer and manufacturing specialist with the Oklahoma Manufacturing Alliance and has over 2 decades of industry experience. He will be on the call during the video today, answering any questions that you may have as they arise during the presentation as well as afterward. So please utilize the chat function and answer any questions that you have for Dr. Krishnamurthy afterwards. And we will begin the webinar.
Welcome to the Fundamentals of Supply Chain Management. This session is going to be brought to you by the Oklahoma Manufacturing Alliance in partnership with the Business Excellence Group. I will be your host, Jim Fleming. For the next 30 to 45 minutes, we're going to be covering what is the content that you would be exposed to if you took this particular workshop. The objectives are going to cover from the front end of what is supply chain and what is a supply chain management, why is it important. We'll go through, talk to the various elements that exist in a supply chain, give you an insight around how our day is influenced every single day. And these are individuals that, not only yourself, but your family, your friends. This isn't about just managing a supply chain while at work, but letting you know and see how you're exposed to it day in and day out. We will talk about the value of leadership and making sure that there's a strong alignment. There are studies out there that show significant expectation is coming from the executive leadership staff down into all organizational departments. And supply management has traditionally been operating in somewhat of a vacuum. And at times, the indicator set that they're working towards may not be in alignment with that of leadership. And so when we go through and do some of the reporting out around how well we've done, what kind of savings we've provided, there is sometimes a mismatch. So we'll kind of step through around why we need to get into alignment and some techniques on ways of going about it. We'll look at product and service, the market demand, really getting an insight to what are we after, what kind of product, where's it at in a life cycle, and some considerations in setting up your supply chain. We'll look at the planning mechanisms. Multiple variables come into this, and we'll talk to different examples and things that you can do to try to gain control or minimize the damage at sometimes, right? Because when chaos occurs, we have to figure out where are we at and what can we do to kind of get back into a stable state. We'll talk through the sourcing components. Sourcing has taken on a far greater meaning in the last decade. And the expectation that's coming out of supply chain professionals is a step function above what it was. We'll look at when we're actually involved with the systems themselves of manufacturing or working with the service or production. How can we influence different strategies? When we really understand the business model we're working within, we can then set up strategies, plans, and align resources to execute accordingly. And really, there are multiple strategies, but we'll cover some of the most common methodologies that help and apply to most of the supply chains out there. We'll look at what is the delivery or logistical components of a supply chain. And the latest element, and probably in the last 5 years, has been the importance of a return stream. In the delivery, there are so many variables depending on where you're pulling material from. If it is domestic, if it's international, where do we stage it? How do we get it into our facility? How do we take finished goods and deliver them to our customers? Or there may be an intermediate step between our customer, such as a retailer or a distribution center or a wholesaler. All of these factors have to be considered in order to be successful. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about some of the expanding roles or additional roles that go on inside of the supply chain, things that we do that really drive a degree of excellence into the company that we're working with. In this particular workshop, you're going to have exposure to approximately 8 continuing education hours, whether that is a single day in a face-to-face environment or in today's COVID environment, whether it is broken up into smaller chunks in a virtual. All of this is going to be dependent on the best method of delivery to your organization. And at the end, you really will walk away with some extremely powerful tools that are going to allow you to apply the material directly when you go back to work. Inside of the course itself, some of these modules have case studies. A lot of them will have templates that you're going to complete. And the one thing that we ask folks to do at the beginning of the class is consider a product line or a current situation that you have at work that you're dealing with, that you can then start to figure out how do you apply these tools real time. In the breakout sessions that we'll have, you'll have an opportunity to think about not only your own particular project and how a topic works, but you'll interact with other students and you'll start to share perspectives. You'll get feedback. You'll actually start to see the light bulbs come on around different concepts. And in some cases, you're going to come back and have to report out to the group on what were the key findings that you had. So the experience is very fruitful when everything is said and done. We do have technology today in the virtual environment that allows us to be successful in different breakout sessions. The face-to-face is generally a preference, but in the past year and a half, we're starting to see somewhat of a shift. So irregardless, when you're done with this session, you're going to walk away with a great experience and a powerful set of tools that you can go back and be very successful at work. We start off in this session really talking about what is the supply chain. And in the overview session, when we talked about the supply chain management series, you saw this chart. And one of the things that really emphasizes is a supply chain is nothing more than a network of entities to take raw materials and put them into a finished state where a consumer can meet some objective, whether it is a good or a service. So in this particular example, we talked about the delivery of a laptop computer. Inside of that computer, there are so many various components. Just in this diagram alone, you see a keypad, you see a case, you see a screen, you're going to see power switches, you're going to see mouse, keypads. When you go inside, you will see computer chips, fans, memory cards, circuit boards. All of these are components that come from somewhere within a supply chain. The center, you start to see these are materials that actually are the core raw materials that feed into the supply chain that enable the manufacturing of a computer. So we have iron ore on the top, or aluminum ore, where we're actually taking the base material from the earth, refining it, transforming it, assembling it, and then putting it into a final state of retail. Oil goes into creating the plastics, the rubber that become part of the laptop. And in the bottom, we have sand. Sand has silica in it that is used to create the computer chips that have all of the different, kind of the brains of what's going on and the computing power inside of that. Also, it's the base material for the screen, the glass that is on there. But they're two different flows because a computer chip flow and a glass flow, while they're similar, they're very unique in what they deliver. And so that's one of the things that you're going to find is that there's no supply chain that is the one size fits all, because there are so many different variables within supply management. And organizations and industries are uniquely defined, whether it is a size, a product line, geographic location, the length of time they've been in business, so many things. And so what you would have to do is you take these skills, you go back and you work to enable them irregardless of the type of supply chain you have. These concepts work whether it is a company of 100,000 or whether it's a company of 2. We talk through in this particular course at the beginning, giving you perspective. So one of the things that we talk about is the supply chain management and me. And when we start looking in the mirror and we think about what are we doing on a daily basis to be part of a supply chain and how do we manage it? Well, we've been doing it far longer than we probably realize. Since we have been going grocery shopping, buying clothes, buying automobiles, looking for housing. These are things in our everyday life that Not only ourselves, but our family and our friends are part of a supply chain, and we're figuring out how to manage it. We're looking for deals. We're looking for how do we make sure that we meet our needs, all kinds of variables, and we gather information, we make the best decisions for our circumstances, and we move forward. We also will look at the degree of impact that we have in a corporation. Approximately 60% of a corporate revenue is managed by the supply chain folks. So the goods and services that are procured and the infrastructure that goes into managing that makes up approximately 60% of a corporate or a corporation's total amount of money they bring in an annual basis. Now, we do this with significant expectations, but most often what we find, we get about 1.5% of the total headcount allocated to our organization. And that makes it extremely difficult because we have a large scope with a small set of individuals. And so this is the value of going through workshops like this, is you gain skills to make sure that you're managing it in the most optimal way. The other thing that we'll look at in a supply chain, when we move forward, we're controlling or managing multiple things, but the main elements that we're dealing with is managing the flow of products and services. We're managing the cash, whether it be from the customer or to the supplier. And in the end, we're having to deal with managing information, because information and data is what helps drive the design and the execution of our supply chain. So it's important for us to really understand these and how they fit together. And you'll gain sets of skills and tools that'll help you put all of those together in a meaningful way so you can execute. The model that we're going to use in this course is adapted from a framework that was originally put together by the Supply Chain Council, and it is managed today or owned by the APICS organization, and it's called the SCORE model. And the SCORE model is one of the more powerful tools that you can utilize when you're thinking about a supply chain. It has you think of some core elements when you're dealing with the development. So in this particular model, while it is not exactly the SCORE model, it has elements of that. And so we will go through and just kind of help you see different things that fall into each and every one of these different buckets. So in the core, you really have to have a true understanding of what is going on, what is the product line, and what the expectations are. We go to the top. You're going to have a planning phase. You really are starting to look at what kind of supply, what kind of demand, what kind of system do I put together. As we go clockwise, you'll see that we need to go source different materials or different services. Find from all of the different opportunities out there, what are the best to meet our needs. Clockwise again, we go into the make. Now we have something here. We're creating the product that our corporation or company is set up to establish. And that could be a good or that can be a service. How do we interact with them? We'll show you some different techniques. We get into the delivering of that product or service. So it goes from a finished good into the supply chain downstream, whether again, it's a distribution center, a warehouse, retail store, but the end state, it's a customer that takes the good and deals with it in whatever manner they intended. And that leads into then the next phase is what happens if they don't want it or it doesn't function as intended. There needs to be a return phase, or what's referred to as reverse logistics. And we will see some different elements of this. And our personal expectations have come, a long ways here in probably the past 2 or 3 years around what returning something looks like. And we deal with this day in and day out, inside of work and outside of work. And we'll talk to those. And then the last, and it's not the least, but it really is, what are the systems or the competencies that we can enhance this entire supply chain process? So we'll talk through the different things around risk management, performance management, contract management, a number of things that when we kind of go above and beyond, or we make sure that we're thinking about the remainder part of the supply chain, it all comes together. And that's the one thing that we want to talk about is that, there are a lot of variables in this, significant interdependencies. So you do something in one of these and it has consequences upstream and downstream. They can be good consequences intended or unintended consequences. And this particular model works for goods and services. So it can be applicable to everything that you're dealing with at your workplace. It starts with thinking about the center of that model, the supply chain management. And one of the things we need to think about is the leadership within the organization. This is the management, the executive staff, the people that have put together what is going on in the environment we're part of. So they're clarifying the core values to the organization. Why is that important? We need to make sure that how we deal with our suppliers aligns with what our expectations are internally. We need to look and work with leadership around what are the future opportunities around risk or expectations around the degree of sophistication of a supply chain. We need to think about what is the risk tolerance that the organization has. And that in itself can get extremely unique. And we have some experiences as of recently around the whole COVID environment and what degree of risk were we willing to take and what was the impact? And we'll talk to that a little bit later. And then one of the other things that we need to make sure leadership is defining who they are as an organization, who we are as an organization, what's the vision of our organization, the mission, the purpose, and the strategies that we're going to take to execute. What we need to do is make sure anything we do in supply chain has strong alignment to all of these items, because they're defining what is true north of the organization, the direction we're going. Now, we don't have to follow exactly the same. What we're going to have to do is just make sure we understand the full ecosystem of our supply chain and make sure it stays in alignment. And things that aren't in alignment, what do we do to change it to make sure it comes back into alignment? So really understanding kind of the environment we're dealing with helps us design and execute the final solution. We'll talk about understanding what's going on in the product or service that we're dealing with. And the topic we'll cover is around product life cycle. We will look at what are the different phases that we are part of. We're going to have different product lines that are sometimes going to be in the purple portion, the introduction, the research and development. What do we do when we're interfacing in that portion of a product? What happens when we're in a ramp phase? We've gone from research and development, and all of a sudden, demand has gone through the roof. Do we have the ability to execute to meet that growth rate? Can our suppliers keep up? Can we keep the information flowing? Can we keep all of the different variables working together to make sure that we optimize the outcome? What happens, what do we do when it's a mature product and that there's not a huge revenue growth because we have saturated the market? So we would take different strategies on that to manage things. And then we get into the final phase of a decline. And you start needing to think about, if I have inventory in the pipeline, what do I do to make sure that I'm bleeding off that inventory at the rate that makes sense and is aligning to the decline of the product? So at the end, ideally, I don't have any excess inventory. And we need to take a look at, how does all of this fit together? Is it the next product line that we're working with? Is it when you refer to kind of a finance S curve, is it a new product launch that it's uniquely different and doesn't use any of the previous items that were part of the previous generation, say the inventory or the bill of material? Or is it the other thing that is referred to as a derivative product? And you can utilize some of the previous generation inventory to be part of the future. So think about just in the company of Apple, from a new product strategy or a new product introduction, when they've gone from the Macintosh computer and went into the iPod, completely different product. Then they went into the smartphone, completely different product. So you would look back and you'd say, probably not a lot of inventory that I can move from one product line to the next. So I have to reinvent the supply chain. Fast forward that to something along the line of an iPhone. When you go from an iPhone current generation to next generation, it's possible some of the items that you have in the previous bill of materials might be applicable into the next. And this is referred to as a derivative product life cycle. So you need to consider, is there things I can reuse? Are there parts that are standardized that I can carry forward? Or are the suppliers the same? And I just make sure that I'm preparing them into the next. So a lot of different phases that we have to make sure we're thinking about. The economics and supply chain management, probably the most recognized model in the world is this supply and demand curve. And it really has the ability to look at what is the fluctuations relative to the price of a product and the quantity that is being delivered. And we have different signals for demand, and they fluctuate. We have different signals for supply, and they fluctuate. And what we need to do within supply chain is strive to make sure that we execute at that point of intersection. That is the optimized solution for an organization. So we need to be thinking about and planning these portions. So what kind of demand forecasts are out there from our customers? Do we have good insight? What is the supply signals that we're giving to our suppliers to make sure they're able to meet our demand, whether it goes up or whether it goes down? What kind of pricing am I dealing with? Is it high price with maybe a large profit margin, or is it low? And is the quantity, is it a very large scale, or does it need to be scaled down to smaller piece parts? These are the things we have to take into account when we are planning a supply chain. Sourcing. I used to work in transaction-based environments where we were told what to buy. And generally an engineer would come up and say, I need this item from this supplier, this price, this quantity. He's waiting for your phone call. Just submit the purchase order. And we executed. Unfortunately, that isn't the world we're dealing with today. Now, some of you very well may still be, but the expectation into advanced supply chain is that we become part of the design early on and finding the best source. So we need to be involved with a number of things around what are the specifications that are needed inside of this item. Can we go out and do analysis around the value of the different suppliers, and then start to take a look at the value from a market research to see who is out there and who wants to be part of our solution. The main driver here is to come up with a source of material, whether, again, it is any of the products that you see on the left-hand side, or it's a service that you might have to have an individual with a certain set of skills. But at the end of the day, one of the things we really have to think about is delivering what the organization needs and not what they want. Now, that's very different. What they want, they may not have considered a number of different variables, or they haven't taken into account timing, the lead times, the different materials, can the supplier make it? So they want something, but we have to go through and find out what do they need and then prioritize to make sure that we're hitting the expectations. And then some of these other things that are desired, we understand what the pricing structure is so we can make better decisions internally. We'll talk about build strategies in products. So now we're working with executing inside of the environment, the production environment. And there are different strategies that we can take. So think about the first one here, the make to stock. This is you're dealing with a customer that has a perceived unlimited demand for their products, and they want as many as they can get. And this might be any consumer electronics. Televisions, I think, are one of the biggest driving things we see today and around the Christmas time. But look at automobiles, look at different clothing and different grocery stores. We are making materials and goods and services at a rate that is stocking all kinds of retail centers around the world. So the way we order, the way we manufacture, and the way we deliver significantly different than if I come back and I think about the next part, and that's make to order. A make to order is if I'm Boeing, and Boeing is going to start building an airplane generally only after they have an order. So you don't want to have, they're just too expensive to have 10 of these, 15 of these sitting in the warehouse or on somebody's, perceived shelf. So once an order comes in, you have to have a supply base that can execute, can get you the turnaround time that you're needed. You need to make sure that it's all synchronized. And then one of the last ones here that we'll talk to is the engineer to order. How do we make sure that we can not only work with the supplier on meeting their customer and meeting their needs, but sometimes we have to go through and design it and engineer it for them and then produce it. All of these have very unique strategies that we would take in supply management. Once we're done with it and we're ready to bring it to the supplier or the customer, what are the ways that we're going to do it? And we start talking about your whole logistics and transportation. And this comes into, needing to think about globalization. Where are we at? Are we sourcing domestically? Or are we sourcing internationally? Thinking about competition and how we're dealing with the best deals. Environmental issues. Can I transport a hazardous material on an airplane? Generally not. So the modality of delivery, if I have something that's hazardous, I need to think about what is the delivery mechanism that I can do it with. So certain trucking companies, not every trucking company, certain ones, certain shipping, certain rail. So we will go through and have to take these into account. We'll also talk about reverse logistics. And that, again, think about Amazon today. The reverse logistics of bringing something or buying something and getting it and then not liking it or wanting to send it back. They have created a system that, basically you go in and you drop it off at certain locations. You have the cash return often within your bank account within 24 hours, and you can reorder something if need be. But you have to take into account when you're in supply chain, how are we going to connect all of these pieces to make sure there's warranty issues, there's cash flow, that the suppliers are getting paid, the suppliers are managing something that they may have been responsible for that is not working. So we need to make sure that that system is designed and succinct and matches with the rest of the organization. When we're enabling, we can be driving things such as spend management or supplier segmentation. And this is just ways that we prioritize the work that is in front of us. What's the most important and what strategies do we deal with going after them? Supplier relationship management or customer relationship management. How do we nurture the relationship to make sure that we're truly getting what we need, and vice versa, the suppliers and customers are getting what they need? How do we deal with risk? How are we managing that? Think of the COVID environment that we just went through. Very telling in companies that were prepared and were able to be adaptive when certain suppliers in certain countries were shut down, and others are on the verge of bankruptcy. A lot of risk that we sometimes have to think about and manage. And then performance management. So we get a supplier, we're paying them a lot of money, we have all these contract terms and conditions, and then we turn our eye onto something else and we're not getting what we paid for. So we have to somehow institute different measures to make sure that the execution aligns to what we're paying for, what the organization expects, and that we're taking appropriate actions if need be. So that brings us into the summary. When we really step back and look, the supply chain itself, all the way from the raw material into what a consumer is wanting. And you can have, sometimes there are 5 different portions of a supply chain, from mining the material, into refining it into a crude ore, into sending it into a factory to shape it, mold it, sending it into a production environment where they assemble it, such as an automobile environment, and then they get it out into the dealers and it gets sold into a customer. And everything you can look at today has some supply chain that has to be managed, and most of them are extremely complex, but there are some fundamental tools that you can apply that work very well to help make sure that we can control or manage the supply chain. We've talked about and have just shown you a number of different entities and processes that are part of that. We talked about the need to control the flow of cash, products, and information. All of them are in sync and have to make sure that this one system reflects the needs and triggers the next and has good communication. And we also need to think about not only our inside stakeholders, but how do we make sure that we're getting good connections from our customers, our suppliers? What are the good forecasts? Can the supplier meet the demand? All of these things have to come together that we're part of enabling. And then one of the things, not only do we have to think about the supply chain running well going forward, today it needs to run backwards. And that is that whole reverse logistics. We today as individual consumers expect, and make decisions around what companies we're going to order from based on some of the return policies that they have. And I think Amazon is really starting to set the bar for a lot of other companies and have taken away a lot of market share or put some of these inefficient companies out of business. So that's what you're going to be dealing with in this workshop. You're going to be gaining insight on the fundamental concepts, how they fit together, where they are interdependent, and that what you can do to influence that. We'll have the next portion of this session be around some questions and answers to help you make sure that this is meeting your needs. And with that, I would like to say on the behalf of the Oklahoma Manufacturing Alliance and the Business Excellence Group, that you have a great experience. And I would like to say thank you and good luck.
All right, now on to the Q&A portion of this session. If there are any questions, Dr. Rajesh is on the call and ready to answer any questions you have. All right, seeing no questions currently, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. Again, the webinar is just a brief overview of what can be a much more detailed assistance offered by the Manufacturing Alliance. To explore further, give us a call or drop us an email. Working with our partners and taking advantage of everyone's capabilities, we'll make sure to connect you to the right resource at the right time. Together, we will grow your business and grow Oklahoma. See you on February 25th at 10 a.m. as we continue this series on supply chain management. Thanks and have a great day.
Thanks.